Hi again YouTube, it's that one guy in lit class, and today I'm going to be talking about the birth of what became known as the structuralist movement in literature. If you're looking for a brief definition for structuralism, let's go ahead and get it out of the way. Structuralism can be defined as a theory that argues that each element in a group can only be understood in relation to the other elements as part of a larger structure, thus the name. Structuralism started as a result of the work of Ferdinand de Saussure, who we will be focusing on in this video. Nowadays, literary structuralism is often called semiotics, although Saussure proposed semiology from the Greek semion, sign, thus the study of signs. Semiotics is indeed the study of signs, and more precisely how signs convey messages. Most of the founding documents of semiotics come from Saussure's text, Course in General Linguistics, which was a collection of notes taken by students of his classes. He himself kept no records of his teaching notes, and the book was published after Saussure's death in 1913. Saussure didn't set out to start a new field, but early in his teaching career he realized that language, which up to that point had been treated as a convenient way of naming things, was a bit more complex than that. Previously, people thought of a language as a natural result of things needing names. That rock needs a name, so we'll call it rock, etc. Saussure argues that in fact, language came about as a way to help people understand things, not just to define them. As an example, let's look at this picture of my dog. In English we might call it dog, in Spanish perro, in German Hund, in French chien. We might all be looking at the same dog, but the word that we have in our head, and Saussure argues the way the word interacts with the other words of our native languages to add connotation, sense imagery, etc., gives us all a slightly different understanding or expectation of what it is to be dog. Saussure's work focuses on the way that language is made. In the same way that a formalist might try to talk about a book based on the component parts that make it up, Saussure tries to talk about language based on the components that make up the elements of language. He starts off by arguing that all language is made up of signs. By putting together signs like I, pet, dog, we create meaning. But he doesn't stop there. He argues that each sign is made up of two parts. The first part is the signifier, the second is the signified. The signifier is hard to describe. Saussure explains it as, quote, the psychological imprint of the sound, the impression that it makes on our senses. It is, in essence, how we think of something in our heads. Even though you aren't making a sound, the idea of the sound helps you to guide your thoughts. Saussure will later call the signifier a sound image, which fits the definition that the signifier has some sort of impact on our senses. The second part of a sign is the signified. Saussure later calls this the concept of something that the signifier is referring to. I tend to think of the signified as a Platonic form, which I discussed in an earlier video. Saussure seems to argue that the signified isn't a literal object, but rather the essence of something, which is very similar to what Plato would say about the highest form of something. If the signifier is how we think about a thing, the signified is what we think of when we think. Also, I'll be using sign and word interchangeably for the rest of this video, so don't let that throw you off. By combining a signifier or sound image with a signified or concept, it becomes possible to create and share signs. The signified and signifier work together to create meaning. One cannot exist without the other. This, Saussure argues, is the purpose of language, to connect thoughts and sounds. He also argues that once this process is completed and the signifier and signified are joined, they are inseparable. He uses the analogy of trying to cut off part of only the front of a piece of paper. Inevitably, by cutting away from the front, you also eliminate from the back. Saussure also claims that signs are arbitrary. What he means by arbitrary is that there is no natural connection between a signified and a signifier. For example, there's nothing about the collection of letters that make up the word tree that would indicate to someone unfamiliar with English that we're talking about this thing here. Thus, whatever meaning we give a sign is culturally constructed. As a group of people, we decided that T-R-E-E spells tree, which refers to the big brown and green guys in forests all over the place. We did this out of necessity. We needed to call them something. This explains why some languages have words that other languages don't. If a language is just a collection of signs that are used for understanding things, not all cultures need to understand the same things. Anticipating that people would argue that there are instances of language that aren't arbitrary, Saussure does claim that both onomatopoeia, where the word for something is the sound something makes, and interjections, things like oh and ouch and ah, are still arbitrary because not all languages have the same words for those things. In English, for example, we might say bark bark is a dog sound, whereas in French, woo woo. Similarly, our interjections are flavored by the sounds of our native tongues. The argument goes that if these were truly universal rather than mere imitations of sound or emotion, that all languages would share them. Once you have created a sign, you can communicate with it by stringing it together with other signs to make something that other people can understand. If, for example, you have the words the bird barks, the dog at, you could rearrange those into a sentence that makes sense. The dog barks at the bird. Notice that there are far more combinations that don't make sense than the one that does. By arranging them in the way that does make sense, we have created what Saussure calls a syntam. A syntam is a group of signs where each sign makes sense only because of the position it holds relative to the other signs in that group. So in the earlier example, arranging the signs in a certain order produced a deeper meaning than taking each sign individually. This kind of arrangement is called a syntagmatic relationship. Syntagmatic relationships are formed as part of a discourse, meaning that you only use them when you are trying to convey a message. The opposite of this is called an associative relationship. When you aren't trying to convey a message, but you're thinking about words that are somehow related, that's an association. Anyone who's ever played a word association game knows how this works. You take a word and find words that that word makes you think of. For example, given the word book, I might think of page, author, reading, letters, and so on. The biggest thing to know about this is that it doesn't matter what order I list the signs in. They are all part of a group related to book. Because we are not trying to communicate a message, it doesn't matter if I switch the words around, because each word is only meaningful as a member of a certain set of words, whatever that set happens to be. Words about books, or words ending in ing or gerunds, etc. To conclude, Saussure's work in semiotics laid the foundation for a wide swath of linguistic theory. While many of his ideas are no longer in favor, for example, advances in neuroscience have given us a better understanding of how the brain processes language, his work still stands as a good entry point into the basic ideas surrounding language, and the questions he raises about what language is made of and how humans use it are questions that the field is still very much interested in. Thanks for watching, and if you liked this video or have suggestions for future videos, please leave a comment down below.